Most teenagers are thrilled if a school project survives long enough to make it to the refrigerator door. Few expect it to end up flying over the White House. Yet, that is exactly what happened to a 17-year-old student from Ohio named Robert Heft. The story begins in 1958, when America was in a peculiar predicament. The nation had 48 states and a perfectly good flag with 48 stars. But everyone knew things were about to get complicated. Alaska was knocking on the door. Hawaii wasn't far behind. Somewhere in Washington, government officials were probably beginning to realize they would soon need a new flag. And whenever the federal government needs to redesign something, one can safely assume committees, subcommittees, reports, hearings, and several thousand cups of coffee will be involved. Meanwhile, a high school student looked at the situation and thought, I can handle this. For a history class project, Robert decided to redesign the American flag. Not because anyone asked him to, not because Congress commissioned him, not because he had inside information. He simply assumed that if 2 new states were coming, somebody ought to figure out where to put the stars. Armed with optimism, imagination, and his mother's sewing machine, Robert got to work. He carefully removed the stars from a 48-star flag and stitched on a new arrangement containing 50 stars. 50! Not 49, not 48 and a half. 50. This was a bold move considering neither Alaska nor Hawaii had officially become states yet. In effect, Robert was turning in a homework assignment from the future. When the project reached his teacher's desk, the response was less than enthusiastic. The teacher examined the flag. He looked at the stars. He looked back at Robert. Then he handed down the sort of grade that has launched a million arguments around dinner tables. B-. Not terrible. Not great. The educational equivalent of saying, I see what you were trying to do. Robert was understandably disappointed. After all, he had spent hours sewing stars onto a flag. Most students had probably submitted poster boards covered in glue and construction paper. But then the teacher made an unusual offer. If the United States government actually adopted the design, he said, the grade would be reconsidered. It was likely intended as a polite way of ending the conversation. After all, what were the odds? The federal government doesn't generally consult teenagers on matters of national symbolism. Yet Robert refused to let the matter rest. Instead of accepting his B- and moving on with life, he sent his design to Washington. Then he waited, and waited, and waited some more. Meanwhile, history continued unfolding. In January of 1959, Alaska became the 49th state. A few months later, Hawaii became the 50th. Suddenly, America needed exactly what Robert had already created. Government officials reviewed thousands of proposed flag designs submitted by citizens from across the country. Thousands. Artists submitted designs. Patriots submitted designs. People with entirely too much free time submitted designs. And somehow, among all those entries, a teenager's history project kept rising to the top. Eventually, the design landed on the desk of President Dwight D. Eisenhower. Imagine being Robert's teacher at that moment. One day you're grading homework. The next day, the President of the United States is reviewing it. That is not typically covered in teacher training manuals. On July 4th, 1960, the new 50-star American flag officially became the nation's flag. Robert Heft's design had won. The teenager from Ohio had successfully redesigned one of the most recognizable symbols on Earth. And somewhere a history teacher suddenly had some paperwork to correct. True to his word, the teacher changed the grade. The B- became an A. It may be the only known case in American history where a student successfully appealed a grade through the executive branch of the federal government. Today, Robert Heft's flag flies everywhere. It flies over schools. It flies over courthouses. It flies over military bases. It flies over embassies on distant continents. It has traveled into space. It has stood on battlefields, at inaugurations, and at countless moments of national triumph and tragedy. Millions of Americans have saluted it without realizing its designer was once a teenager trying to complete a homework assignment. And perhaps that is the best part of the story, because it reminds us that history is not always made by famous politicians, powerful businessmen, or celebrated generals. Sometimes history is made by a kid with a sewing machine, a stubborn streak, and the audacity to believe that his homework deserved a second look. And somewhere in the great cosmic record book of education, there remains one glorious lesson. Never underestimate a student determined to turn a B- into a national achievement.